Welcome to the Playing Books podcast. We are opening up a really remarkable playbook today, one that challenges, well, everything you probably thought you knew about searching for employment. Who's hiring who? By Richard Lathrop.
It's not just a guide. I think of it more as a radical re-education. Lathrop's core idea, his thesis, it just flips the script entirely. It says that a successful job search, it shouldn't be this desperate plea for help.
Right.
It should be an exciting challenge or even a fascinating game that you approach from a position of confidence, of equality.
That concept alone is, it's worth its weight in gold. We are trained culturally and structurally to feel subservient in the job market, aren't we?
Totally.
We're taught to be grateful just to get the interview. But Lathrop insists that if you really engage with this material, you, the listener, will acquire knowledge about the dynamics that control hiring decisions. And this knowledge will make you more informed than most of the people who are actually doing the hiring.
And that's the ultimate knowledge advantage. Lathrop paints a pretty bleak, but let's be honest, a very accurate picture of the alternative. He calls it the path of the average applicant.
A torturous trial and error cast-about method. I love that phrase.
It's perfect, isn't it? Think about that. You're throwing resumes into the wind, just hoping anything sticks.
And what's the inevitable consequence of that kind of aimless casting about?
It's intense confusion, deep discouragement. And then eventually, that painful process of settling.
Well, settling, yeah.
You accept a job, and it's often chosen by fate or just sheer exhaustion, and it is significantly below the peak of your real abilities. Lathrop asks us to confront this fact that in our society, it's considered normal to be underemployed.
And that normalization has these huge societal consequences. Lathrop makes this really astonishing claim, one that speaks to just how inefficient the current system is.
What's that?
He says that just by providing low-cost, effective guidance on how to navigate the job market, we could cut chronic unemployment rates in half.
In half. When you think about the economic disruption, the personal pain caused by joblessness, that is a spectacular promise.
So if the solution is that simple, a shift in strategy, some basic education, why isn't this stuff a required course in high school and college? Why are we graduating people who are ready to perform these complicated tasks but are completely unequipped to sell those skills?
Well, it really speaks to the inherent structural advantage that's held by those who already understand the dynamics. But Lathrop, he wants to arm the applicant. The fundamental shift you have to make is to move away from what he calls the hat-in-hand supplicant business.
And this is where that equality principle you mentioned comes in. You're not asking for a favor.
Not at all.
You have to internalize the fact that you are offering an employer value that is at least equal to any pay they might offer you. You're bringing energy, skills, loyalty. You're there to solve their problems.
They need you. They need you just as much, maybe even more, than you need the paycheck.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you approach employers with that attitude, you're actually helping them with one of their most vital functions, which is finding good people. You're offering strong, measurable value.
So it transforms the whole interaction from this kind of subservient audition into an exploration of a mutually beneficial relationship.
Exactly.
But Lathrop, he doesn't shy away from the dark reality of the system for those who don't have this knowledge. He calls the typical job market structure, what was it? Barbarically inhumane.
Yes, because of the devastating psychological toll it takes. He details these effects so clinically, but so powerfully. He talks about that pervasive feeling of being unclean or that you're carrying some sort of invisible stigma.
And your friends might start to subtly shun you, acting as if your unemployment is contagious. It's brutal. And he targets this specifically at the male job seeker, though I think the sentiment applies to anyone whose identity is tied to their work. Lathrop writes that men might feel unsexed or less inclined to pursue social relationships because their confidence is it's completely eroded.
It's a total collapse of self-worth.
And what's so jarring is that this psychological devastation often happens even if the unemployment is due to massive external factors, a change in trade policy, a company merger, some mismanagement decision made miles above your head.
Yet society defaults to this idea that there must be something fundamentally wrong with you.
Right. And Lathrop explains that others often have to believe this because if they didn't, their own sense of security in their job would just immediately erode.
And the most brutal blow, he warns, often comes from within the family unit. When a spouse or a partner starts to question whether you lack the strength or the ability or the adaptability to pull your share of the financial load.
Lathrop urges steeliness and strategic action precisely because of these pressures, both external and internal. The job search isn't just about income. It's a battle for your self-esteem, for your future identity. And that fight begins by finding out who you truly are. Which brings us to the next critical phase, strategic self-discovery.
Okay, so we've established that the average path leads to accepting a job that uses way less than your full talent. But the primary question Lathrop pushes us to ask is not just about find a job, but actively moving toward a career, employment that fully uses all of your abilities, your experience, and your potential for growth.
It's about aiming for that hazy peak of your potential, not the comfortable base of your past experience. Lathrop discusses the stunning effect of professional career analysis, that moment when people discover, usually to their ecstatic surprise, that their abilities and their potential are considerably greater than they had ever imagined.
He describes this realization as a deeply moving revelation. It reminded him of Michelangelo's famous analogy, that the figure is already there, inside the marble. You just have to carve away the stone that's covering it.
And the process of self-discovery that Lathrop outlines is exactly that. It's hard work, for sure, but the self that gets revealed it's inspiring.
This whole exploration is essential because Lathrop sees this reliance on past job experience as introducing what he calls the heavy hand of fate into your career. If you only look at your last 3 job titles, you're limiting your future to your past.
And here's the practical danger in that. Employers hire based on the abilities you communicate to them. So if you only talk about your experience, they offer you a job at the base of those abilities, not the peak of your true potential, which you yourself might only vaguely perceive.
So that failure to analyze your true ability first can lead you down completely the wrong career path.
Lathrop is emphatic about this. Ability, fundamentally, is what counts. It's a built-in factor, a talent you already have that needs to be consciously discovered, brought out, and then strategically presented to employers.
This sounds almost philosophical, but he anchors it in this really hard reality with a case study of James Craig Kirby. This story is it's a perfect illustration of the failure of letting fate or external pressure dictate your path.
Kirby was a classic example. He was persistently aiming for engineering, and why?
Well, there was a huge need, high salary potential, and his father was an engineer, so he tried to fit that mold.
Exactly. He loaded up on mechanical drawing, physical science courses, all of it. But his reality, his true self, fought back pretty quickly. His grades in technical courses were low, his passion was clearly somewhere else, the school's athletic program, and this mismatch just continued into his work life.
It created this persistent record of failure.
Right. As an engineering aide, he admits he goofed off constantly because he had no interest. He was almost fired. As a lifeguard, he caused this expensive mess up in the pump room, got reprimanded for paying too much attention to female customers.
And the most serious failure was in the Army. He almost faced a court-martial for issuing an obviously defective part, which resulted in a serious accident. His commanders basically concluded he was a nice guy, but completely unreliable as a soldier.
And yet, when he got out of the service, what did he do?
He aimed right back toward engineering.
Because that's where his experience pointed him. This is that heavy hand of fate Lathrop warns about.
But fortunately, he runs into a competent counselor who steps in.
And she recognizes immediately that Kirby is letting a series of failures define his goals. So she pivots the entire analysis. Instead of looking at what he failed at, she started asking about accomplishments from when he was doing what he wanted to do. Those moments where true ability just spontaneously reveals itself.
And the findings were, night and day compared to his engineering record. In high school, he was great in English and social studies. He successfully persuaded the athletic director to establish a crew team, even got them secondhand racing shells using PTA funds.
Right. As a lifeguard, despite that pump room incident, he organized a swinging team that went on to sweep every single meet in its league.
Even his time in the Army had hidden clues. He convinced the executive officer to do a survival hike, showing leadership and persuasion. Later, he organized this grimly humorous tour for visiting generals at the missile base.
And his excellent appearance, his affable manner, his focus on the human side of the base, it impressed the brass so much they got a laudatory letter from the mayor.
The conclusion was just inescapable. Kirby failed spectacularly at the things he thought he should do, engineering, technical stuff, but he excelled whenever he was enjoying himself. He showed these tremendous abilities in athletics, organization, persuasion, public relations.
So by switching his focus from that dismal engineering experience to his innate, proven abilities, the counselor helped him craft something called a qualifications brief. and it was aimed at a public relations assistant role, specifically focusing on motivating large groups in athletics and outdoor activities. He went from almost being court-martialed to a fulfilling career based on his discovered talent.
That transition from self-doubt to self-knowledge is the foundation of Lathrop's practical guide, the Career Analysis Guidelines, or CAG. This is the mechanism for you, the listener, to find your own ideal job content.
The preparation itself is a serious commitment. Lathrop advises finding a quiet space, dedicating significant time, and using a very large sheet of paper. He specifies 24 by 18 inches, so shelf paper, wrapping paper. You need space to record your life's data.
And you have to divide that paper into 6 distinct columns. Instead of just listing them, let's unpack why each one is so necessary for this deep revelation. The first column is general abilities, which is pretty self-explanatory. But the next two are crucial and so often ignored: dislikes and persisting correctable limitations.
Why focus on dislikes? Well, Lathrop argues that if you find yourself deeply dissatisfied or consistently performing poorly in certain areas across multiple jobs, like, say, record keeping or strict supervision, or dealing with bureaucracy, these are major directional signposts.
So if you hate meticulous bookkeeping, you shouldn't aim for a controller role, no matter how good the pay is.
Exactly. Dislikes define the environment you have to avoid. And persisting correctable limitations, that's a commitment to growth. If you're consistently criticized for poor public speaking or not being able to manage a small team, those are limitations you have to commit to fixing, not just pretending they don't exist. It forces a kind of brutal self-honesty.
And the final 3 columns are where it all comes together: specific abilities, specific functions, and ideal job content. You're translating the broad observations from the first 3 columns into actionable career characteristics.
The process starts by reviewing your entire life, high school, college, every single job, every project. As you list your accomplishments in those first 3 columns, Lathrop says to record not just success, but bonuses and pleasure.
When did the work feel effortless? When did you genuinely enjoy the challenge?
This is where the asterisk technique comes in. If an ability or an interest repeats itself across different life stages, say, you were great at debate in high school, and then you founded a successful campus political group in college, you put a red asterisk next to the related older item. That repetition signals a powerful, innate strength.
So, for example, if you were a playground director, you might list a positive accomplishment in column 1, like developing unusual special events and gaining citywide publicity. But in column 2, you might list disliking record keeping or disciplining kids. You're mapping the joy and the dread.
Once you have this huge map of your life, you move to the final steps, identifying your most significant strengths. Lathrop says to limit yourself to underlining only 5 to 10 of the most significant items of different types. These are usually the ones with the asterisks or the ones underlined twice. They represent your greatest, most fulfilling accomplishments.
And finally, you determine the content of your ideal job in column 6. You list the specific functions and abilities you just underlined, starting with the double underlined or asterisk items. But this column also includes your pay goals and the environment you need. Does it have to be in a city? Does that have to involve travel?
By the time you finish the CAG analysis, Lathrop promises you'll have a level of self-knowledge and career direction that's matched by, well, by very few people in the market. You are no longer casting about. You've defined the figure inside the stone.
Okay, so knowing your abilities is only half the battle. Now, you need a weapon to present that value. And this leads us to the qualifications brief, or Q brief. Lathrop hammers home this crucial, cold reality. The best jobs do not necessarily go to the best qualified people, but to the best applicants, the ones who master the art of getting hired.
And the Q brief is your primary sales tool. It's designed to make your job hunt shorter, easier, and dramatically more satisfying. Because the average employer is just. They're drowning in paper. The visual impact of the Q brief is paramount.
Lathrop lays down some really strict rules for making this document look attractive and clean. First, the length. 1 page for 10 years of experience or less. 2 pages for more than 10 years. And these limits are tight, no exceptions.
And why such a strict limit? Because employers, especially in that hidden job market we'll talk about, are busy. They're looking for reasons to discard your application, not excuses to keep reading. A dense, multi-page resume signals that you don't know how to synthesize information or respect their time.
The format has to demand attention. Ample white space, wide margins, typewriter-sized print are mandatory. No fine print or fancy script that looks like you're trying to hide something. Instead, you use marginal leads, centered headlines, or strategic underlines to instantly draw the eye to your most powerful experience.
And just as important are the things you omit. Lathrop is very clear. No covering sheet. It's just unnecessary bureaucracy. Cut any employment details more than 10 years old unless they are absolutely foundational to what you do now. Avoid those generalized summaries at the start. You lead with impact, not with a preamble. And never use official documents. This is a sales pitch, not a personnel file.
But the single most important element is the objective. Lathrop calls it critical to the entire campaign's success. It has to be stated not in terms of what you want, but in terms of your highest proven abilities and accomplishments.
And crucially, the objective has to be cast in terms of your ability to advance the employer's interest. Are you going to increase efficiency, reduce costs, expand their markets? Your objective should immediately position you as a solution provider, not a job seeker.
So you avoid those vague virtues like dedicated or honest. Everyone claims that. You have to show them the results.
The objective is the hook. It casts what he calls a rosy glow over the rest of the brief, and it predisposes the reader to view your experience favorably. Once you set that, the rest of the brief has to prove your qualifications. And Lathrop advises showing your best experience first, regardless of chronology. Forget the standard reverse chronological order if your greatest wins were early on. Lead with the wins.
And you have to emphasize success and quantifiable results, not just recite your duties. The contrast here is huge. Instead of saying responsible for customer interaction, you describe the result of that interaction.
He has some fantastic practical examples. Take Jordan Pruitt, who was working a part-time job. Instead of listing stocked shelves and processed orders, he wrote, got many repeat calls from customers. And he included a short quote from his boss who joked that Jordan delivered the order before they put it in.
That instantly signals high reliability, speed, positive customer service, all the soft skills employers are actually looking for.
Or consider Brenda Brigham, aiming for an anthropology teaching role. She didn't list her course history. Instead, she emphasized the successful outcome of developing a wool project that became this celebrated neighborhood exhibit. She led new nature and drama programs for preteens. These points showcase initiative, engagement, the ability to produce a real community impact.
And Suzanne McCullough, applying for an administrative assistant role, she used immediate quantification. She developed a teacher support program that resulted in test scores going up 20% and failure rates going down 80%. This isn't just administration, this is impact. Lathrop's lesson is so clear. Duties are what you did, results are what you changed.
The Q brief also requires navigating the sensitive topic of personal data. Lathrop's advice, which is rooted in pragmatism, is to include personal data, age, health, marital status, only if it actively supports favorable consideration.
And this is where we have to acknowledge that Lathrop was writing in a time when certain biases were more prevalent, and he's giving pragmatic advice to navigate that reality. For instance, he discusses the situation for female candidates, recognizing that some stiffly starched establishmentarian types frowned on women with children. He advises omitting any mention of children in the brief, but being prepared to assure them of loving care arrangements during the interview.
The goal is to get past that initial screen. Similarly, the divorce factor. Lathrop says to say nothing, treat it as irrelevant to your professional value. However, he does note that in specific roles that imply independence or require intense travel, divorce can be framed as an asset. He uses the example of an over-the-road trucker, where lack of family ties was seen as a positive. It's like the historical orphans preferred for Pony Express riders. An interesting, if dated, parallel.
For our listeners with military experience, the military translation protocol is probably one of the most crucial sections. Lathrop warns that the civilian world simply does not understand military jargon. Using terms like quartermaster, adjutant, or describing search and destroy missions will only confuse or alienate a civilian employer. They operate on a completely different vocabulary.
So the solution is comprehensive translation. You have to shift from military speak to civilian project management and operations language. For example, instead of commanded, ordered, you should use directed, administered, managed, coordinated. Instead of soldiers, sailors, airmen, troops, you use personnel, staff, crew, team.
You're translating operational tasks into transferable skills. So history of leading long-range recon patrols becomes managed and coordinated operational teams across complex logistical environments. You're focusing on the administration, the coordination, the goal attainment, not the combat context.
And there's a crucial subtlety here with fiscal responsibility. If you managed a massive, say, $25 million annual budget in the military, but you're applying for a $2 million operation, you have to tone down that terminology. Lathrop warns against scaring civilians. You need to use discrete terminology designed to fit the scale of the target job. making sure the brief carries pride but is easily relatable to the person reading it.
Okay, so with the Q brief perfected, we transition from preparation to an offensive strategy. And this is where Lathrop really breaks from traditional job searching. He stresses that the vast majority of opportunities, at least 80%, are in the hidden job market. These jobs never reach agencies or online boards.
So concentrating your effort here is non-negotiable.
And how do you access this hidden market? The proactive strategy. Go directly to employers and critically see them daily without asking if they have openings. This is where that assertive, non-supplicant mindset really kicks in. You're asserting capability. You're aiming to place your name at the top of their list for when a suitable job inevitably opens up.
That sounds great, but isn't that a huge risk of just annoying the employer? How do you balance being persistent with being perceived as a nuisance?
Lathrop addresses this by focusing on conviction and brevity. If you call an employer, he recommends immediately introducing yourself and saying, "I'm sure I can do a great job in your department when one opens up. May I come to see you?" You're selling a future solution, not begging for a current vacancy.
And he anticipates the resistance. If they push back and say they need someone with more specific experience, you don't back down, you press further. I learn fast, and you can count on the fact that I'll work hard for you. I'd like to prove it to you. Can I come see you? That persistent, confident approach shows conviction, and often it wins you the hearing.
This same aggressive confidence is required in your written correspondence. The average employer is swamped, and the average letter is dull, generalized, and headed for the burn basket after the first line. You need letters that demand immediate attention.
The basic rules are foundational. Type each one individually, address the employer by name and title, no "Dear Sir" or "To whom it may concern," and open with a strong sentence that's designed to make the employer, as he says, take your feet off the desk.
The redemption story of Joe Jones, a retiring military officer, is perfect here. His first attempt was a total failure. It was generic, addressed "Dear Sir," and made the fatal error of applying for the recipient's job, Miss Simp, the contract officer. He's basically asking her to hire his replacement.
So the successful rewrite was transformative. It was addressed specifically to Miss Susan R. Smith, contract officer, and the opening immediately zeroed in on her professional interests, her potential problems. It said, "While serving as a contract administrator for the Navy, I uncovered information about defense contracting procedures, which I believe will interest you a great deal. I am sure that adopting such changes will prove most profitable for Ansonia."
He framed his entire experience as privileged knowledge that could directly benefit her company. He wasn't asking for a job. He was offering valuable intelligence, a solution. That's the difference between applying and selling.
And his closing was just as assertive. He didn't ask if he could call. He stated his action. "I will be in Ansonia next week on Wednesday, and will call you before then to learn when we might get together." He makes the follow-up his responsibility, which prompts Miss Smith to mentally clear a space for him rather than waiting for her permission.
Lathrop also notes an even more sophisticated technique, sending a compelling letter without the Q brief. If your letter can detail a series of thundering accomplishments, like Fernando Hernandez, who listed his rapid advancements and honors, it often creates more intrigue to hold the brief back.
And why hold it back? Because the letter's job is to secure the interview. Once you're in the interview, you can discover the employer's current specific problems. Then you leave, tailor a modified Q brief to zero in on those problems, using your accomplishments as proof of solution, and send that customized document immediately. It dramatically increases your closing power.
This tailoring strategy ties directly into the core approach: context, objectives, resources, environment. This is the mechanism for approaching an employer cold. Not to ask for an open job, but to seek an exploratory discussion. To discover a previously unrecognized need that you can fill, which might even lead to them creating a job for you.
When you're cold calling for a core discussion, you have to anticipate and neutralize the sentry, the receptionist or gatekeeper. If the sentry asks if you're looking for employment, Lathrop says you have to interrupt immediately with conviction. "Not at all. I'm not looking for a job offer. I would like to see employer to get his critical judgment regarding some of the problems of industry and my ideas on them."
You frame it as seeking expert views from the employer, positioning yourself as a fellow industry thinker, not a beggar. You might say you're thinking about entering the field, and you value their perspective on its challenges.
Once you're in that discussion, you ask what the employer's heaviest headaches are. Let's think about a practical example. For Craig Gladhander, manager of the Mountain Air Resort, a headache might be chronic staff turnover or a big drop in convention bookings during the off-season.
Right. And you offer ideas as questions, inviting their guidance rather than making flat assertions. So if the headache is seasonal bookings, you don't say, I can fix your marketing plan.
No, you ask, I was wondering if perhaps exploring regional corporate retreats might leverage the resort's existing infrastructure during the fall months. What are your thoughts on that?
The goal isn't to prove you know everything, but to show that you deeply understand their concerns and can formulate intelligent, results-oriented questions. The moment the employer identifies a real aching problem and you offer a plausible way forward, your lack of direct experience becomes unimportant.
You want to move them to the point where they think, if this person can solve my biggest headache, I should create a job for them. If Gladhander mentions that a colleague in a nearby city might have solved a similar problem, Lathrop urges you to contact that person immediately, saying that Gladhander suggested the meeting. This process snowballs, building credibility and leading you closer to that ideal created role.
Okay, so once the proactive strategy gets you in the door, interview mastery becomes the final piece of the puzzle. Lathrop observes that interviews can be exotically random affairs that wander all over the place unless you prepare and take control.
Preparation has to start long before you walk into the room. You need to learn as much as possible about the organization, their products, recent news, financial health, and crucially, you need intelligence on the person interviewing you, including their foibles, maybe from friends or trade associations.
Why learn the foibles?
Because people are irrational. Knowing their specific interests or pet peeves allows you to subtly tailor your language and focus the conversation on topics they value. You can instantly establish a rapport and trust that goes way beyond mere qualifications.
The goal isn't just to talk about your experience, it's to demonstrate your expertise in action. You do this by discussing their specific problems, offering clear conclusions, and weighing suggestions. You position yourself as a trusted advisor, not just another candidate.
And you have to assert control over the flow. If the interview wanders into irrelevant territory, the weather, hobbies, you have to tactfully guide it back to the job. Lathrop suggests using gentling modifiers. Do you mind if I ask a question? Or, in connection with that, I had wondered, these are polite interruptions that keep the meeting focused.
The whole interview is a ramp-up to the closing gambit, which has to be direct and timely. After demonstrating your value by expertly discussing their challenges, you have the critical, pointed question that demands a commitment. Mr. Smith, if you had to define the biggest headache facing your office today, what would it be?
Once they identify that pain point, you strike. You press for commitment. Don't you think I could make a strong contribution to your operations? Lathrop says it's at this immediate juncture, having just admitted their deepest need, that they're most inclined to say yes. Your final move, after settling on the terms, is to ask when you start work.
And those terms lead us to the true, high-value play, pay negotiation. Lathrop teaches that knowing the rules here can produce results tens of thousands of dollars beyond your expectations. It can transform the whole trajectory of your income.
The fundamentals which most applicants ignore are that pay is always negotiable, and employers almost always operate with a flexible pay range. They're rarely locked into a single number.
The Golden Cloud anecdote is the perfect proof of this. A candidate, confident in her value, asked for $35,000, which was $5,000 above her own expectation. The employer misheard her. He thought she said $3,500 a month, which is $42,000 a year. He quickly accepted the $42,000 figure.
So she ended up accepting a job worth $12,000 more than she expected, simply because her conviction allowed her to set a high anchor, which the employer misinterpreted upward.
That story just shows how much range and irrationality exist in the salary decision. So how do you apply this intentionally? Step 1. Dodge the initial salary question.
You need a phrase ready, something like, the content of the job is far more important to me than the pay right now, and I want to be absolutely sure this is the right mutual fit. I wonder if we might go into the specific responsibilities before we get down to specifics. It buys you time to gather intelligence.
Once you have a general idea of what people in similar roles earn, your internal pay intelligence, you throw out a feeler. And you have to set your range high. For example, if you think the job is worth $55,000, you might throw out a range of $65,000 to $70,000. That's your anchor, and you wait for the reaction.
The next crucial tactical step is forcing the employer's commitment. You ask them directly, what pay range did the company have in mind for this position? Now they're motivated to put the figure as high as they possibly can, hoping you'll accept immediately. If they respond, $62,000 is our top for this opening, well, you've successfully negotiated, and the job is likely yours at a higher figure than you might have initially stated.
Lathrop's golden rule for this whole section can't be overstated. Always state your pay requirement in a range, and, critically, set the minimum pay in your range 10% higher than the absolute minimum you will accept.
Why the range? Because it implies flexibility while still setting a powerful anchor. And why the 10% cushion? Because it's easy to back off a high figure and still land above your baseline, but it's impossible to recover your credibility if you start too low. You set your floor higher than your true floor.
And the negotiation doesn't stop at base salary. You have to leverage this moment for non-salary benefits. This is where you can add significant long-term value that many applicants never even think about.
Think about enhanced vacation time. If the policy is no vacation in year one, you negotiate for 2 weeks immediately. You can secure guarantees for annual cost of living raises tied to the consumer price index, not just internal budgeting. This protects your long-term income from inflation.
Other negotiable benefits could be tuition subsidies for advanced degrees, signing bonuses, stock options, or even securing the budget for office refurbishing or necessary equipment. Lathrop stresses that this careful approach, these few choice words, can lead to a differential that adds up to $40,000 or more over just a few short years.
And one final piece of transactional advice. Any benefit you secure that is outside the organization's normal written policy, that customized vacation time, that specific raise commitment, you must ask for it in written confirmation. Do not rely on verbal agreements.
So zooming out to the bigger picture, Lathrop addresses the abundance of opportunity, which counters that prevailing narrative of scarcity. He stresses that millions of job openings exist every month due to turnover, even during bad economic times.
The problem isn't the lack of jobs. It's the lack of information flow. Lathrop notes that traditional job fillers agencies, HR, they focus only on the small fraction of openings that are actively advertised, maybe 1 in 5. But the proactive job finder who understands this uses the total job supply as their target.
And Lathrop takes it one step further. He says applicants who truly understand the market and master these strategies don't just find jobs. They actually expand the nation's total job supply by persuading employers to create roles tailored to their own image and capacity.
This reliance on the hidden market means you can't run a secret campaign. You have to leverage every single connection. Lathrop encourages you to use your job campaign as a good topic for talk, with friends, instructors, at parties, church socials, everywhere.
People genuinely want to help you. They get a positive sense of accomplishment when they successfully produce a lead for you. Keeping your campaign secret deprives your network of the chance to feel useful and productive in helping you.
And you have to embrace your natural allies, other applicants. Lathrop suggests moving beyond exchanging glum looks in reception areas. Strike up a conversation. Form a job seeker club. Arrange weekly meetups to exchange leads, ideas, and crucially, to maintain morale. This dramatically expands your eyes and ears in the market.
Regarding professional resources, Lathrop offers some practical caution. If you visit the local state employment office, don't just grab a pamphlet. Ask specifically for the wisest and most experienced counselor in your occupational category. Register? Yes, but never let that process slow down your personal, proactive campaign.
And caution is especially warranted with private agencies. You have to understand their fee arrangements precisely. Lathrop warns that some contracts can hold you responsible for thousands of dollars if you lose the job within the first year. You have to read the fine print. If you're in a scarce skills category, use the professional placement services that are employer paid. They offer confidential help without charging you a fee.
And never overlook the unsung heroes of career strategy, librarians. Lathrop calls them giants as educators and towers of strength for job seekers. Tell your librarian the field you're exploring, and they will lead you to invaluable, non-advertised resources. Specialized periodicals, directories like the Occupational Outlook Handbook. They are the key to unlocking that context and environment information.
And finally, Lathrop gives us the long game, advancement strategy on the job. This is maybe his most pragmatic, maybe even cynical piece of advice. He states that advancement depends more on the impression of excellence you create with your superiors than on raw performance alone.
So if you're turning in excellent work, but your superiors are unaware of it or just perceive it as adequate, others are going to move ahead of you. You have to actively manage the perception of your performance.
One of the fastest ways Lathrop suggests to rapidly advance is to volunteer for the impossible jobs. These are the tasks or projects that others have repeatedly tackled and repeatedly failed to conquer.
Why does this skyrocket your career?
Because the risk is zero. You immediately become a hero in the organization the day you bid for the job. And because failure is the expectation, you can only do better than your predecessors. Any success, even small success, is amplified tenfold when it's applied to a previously impossible problem.
Lathrop's ultimate message, which really runs through every single page of Who's Hiring Who, is a call to action against inertia. Self-doubt, listlessness, waiting for the phone to ring. It can only spoil your chances for a happy and rewarding career. Every day you put off doing something about it just makes matters worse. So the final imperative is simple. Move.
The philosophy laid out in Who's Hiring Who by Richard Lathrop is, well, it's a complete and strategic overhaul of the job search. It replaces all the confusion, the discouragement, the subservience of the average applicant with strategic competence, a focus on intrinsic value, and assertive communication.
By taking the time to deeply analyze your core abilities, crafting a compelling qualifications brief that sells quantifiable results, proactively targeting that hidden job market, and mastering the interview as a high-stakes, high-value negotiation, you permanently shift the power dynamic in your favor.
This is a manual for taking decisive control of your economic trajectory and negotiating the foundation for an enhanced, rewarding career path that's tailored precisely to your unique strengths and your capacity for enjoyment.
We encourage you to apply the radical, career-defining ideas from Who's Hiring Who by Richard Lathrop to immediately improve and enhance your lives, whether you're launching a new search or planning your next strategic career move.
What stands out to you the most? Is it the power of the Q brief, or maybe that psychological leverage of the core approach? We encourage you to connect with Richard Lathrop on social media to share your success stories using the book's methods, and to commit to purchasing the book today to begin your transformation.
Thank you for joining us for this extensive discussion into strategic career advancement.
Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast with friends and colleagues who need this crucial career inspiration. Until next time, keep reading and keep playing the game.